Hey everybody, welcome to the Cripescast. I'm your host Charlie Behrens. We are presented by Jolly Good Soda, and today we've got Scott Dikkers on the podcast. He's one of the founding editors of The Onion, and it's pretty cool for me because The Onion is one of my earliest comedy influences. If you're unfamiliar with The Onion, it's a satire newspaper. It's been around forever. It's been through many different iterations, radio, TV. It's got a great online presence now. But I grew up just reading it with my brothers, laughing at the headlines. We got the book one year for Christmas. And when I was in college, The Onion was actually still in print. Kind of dating myself here. But I remember the least productive day at college was always the day that The Onion came out. And it wasn't just me either. Like every professor, I remember would like look around the hall and there was just an Onion on everybody's desk. And, you know, they knew it was a lost cause on that day. So anyway, to be able to talk with Scott is just very cool. Not just hearing his journey from being just a Midwest kid who you know enjoyed drawing cartoons to someone who actually turned his craft and hustled with his craft and made it all the way to the top tier of American comedy. I mean, it's just a real honor. And yeah, and I got to really nerd out with him on this podcast about sort of the dynamics of comedy and how to craft an amazing punchline. And I also asked him, you know, his favorite Onion headlines and what they were and why. I had a great time, and I think you're going to really enjoy it too. But Scott's not just a founding editor of The Onion. He's also an author. He's a New York Times bestseller, in fact. He's got a lot of great books out there, like How to Write Funny. And also Our Dumb Century. That was the book that me and my brothers got for Christmas one year that we just couldn't put down. So anyway, it was great having him on. We'll get to that conversation in a second. Before we do, I don't know if you can tell, but I think my recording sounds a little bit different this week. That's because I'm on a Zoom recorder and I forgot the pop filter, so I can't say too many P's without covering it with my hand so it doesn't do that. Sorry, was that necessary, Charlie? No, it wasn't. Right now I'm in Tampa. I'm in a Hampton Inn because it was cheap, and I'm looking out at the Tampa skyline. Got a show here tomorrow night at the Tampa Improv, and then we go down to Naples. We're doing, I think, 5 shows at Off the Hook Comedy Club. The early ones are sold out, but the late ones, we still got some tickets available. We added shows on Thursday and Friday night, so if you're in Naples or in the area and you want to see some comedy, come on out. I think it starts at like 9:30 or something. And then next, Salt Lake City, Denver. Following week, we're in Boston, Portsmouth. So there you go. There's the little tour. What else am I supposed to mention? Oh, yeah, Valentine's Day is coming up. And if you go to cripescast.com, you can find the tour dates and stuff that I just mentioned. But if you click on merch, you can get a lot of stuff for your special someone. And we have a promo code, which of course I forgot. What is it? The promo code is DEAR15. And starting on February 2nd, if you use DEAR15, why is it DEAR15? Why did we choose that? I don't know. Not important. But DEAR15, if you click that in the promo code, you get 15% off all Watch Out for Deer items. Why do you get 15% off Watch Out for Deer items? Because Watch Out for Deer is how Midwest people say, I love you, when they lack the emotional capacity to do so. There you have it. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking, but that's okay because the more interesting person is coming up. Here's my interview with Scott Dikkers. Hey, Scott. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Nice to see you. Thanks for doing this.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, no, it's an absolute honor to have you on.
That's very kind of you to say.
No, I mean, I've been, like, especially going to Madison and kind of coming up, you know, with that sort of journalism comedy background. I mean, yeah, you know, I feel like a lot of what you've done has influenced me so much. So, no, that's a great honor.
Oh, great. Thank you. You got the SM7 there.
Oh, yeah, just got it.
my buddy, he's a recording guy, so he said that it's good for podcasts. And then I think they do a lot of big songs were recorded on these suckers, I think.
Yeah, even though it's a dynamic and not a condenser microphone, it's like one of the best voice mics there is. It's really good. So
yeah,
it's definitely a good choice.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll pass on your approval to him, as I was skeptical based on the price, but it's actually not that expensive if you got
it's like
have
$200, right?
I think it's a little more. I think they've gone up. I think they're about 400 now. But yeah.
Cool. And who is the audio guy? I know some people in the Madison area.
Oh yeah, it's my buddy Bill, actually, who I do some videos with. But yeah, who you know a lot of guys doing that in Madison still?
Yeah, I used to have a recording studio there, and I sold it to these guys at Audio for the Arts, Buzz Kemper and Steve Gotcher. Steve is out now, but Buzz runs it, and they record a lot of orchestras and music, but also a lot of voice and stuff too. So
oh, cool.
I think they're like the only recording studio left in Madison, Wisconsin now.
Wow, that's interesting. Like, especially Madison being like, do you know Butch Vig at all?
Yeah, and obviously there's a big history with that in Madison. So
yeah.
Smart Studios, I think, finally went under. So
yeah, it's crazy, but I think they'll. I don't know. I feel like that city's seen a lot of change, some for the better, some for the worse, but.
Yeah.
Again, thank you for coming on. And I guess I wanted to start with, like, where did you first get inspired to do The Onion?
Well, it was brought to me by these two guys who started it, Tim Keck and Chris Johnson. And I first heard about Tim Keck about a year before The Onion started. He had made a calendar, like a 11 by 17 sheet of paper folded in half, that had advertising around the edge and a calendar in the middle. It was like a school calendar.
Yeah.
And he had co-opted my friend James Sturm to draw some comic strips for that calendar. His comic strip on campus was called Down and Out Dog, and it was very popular. It was very funny. And so Tim sold the ads, and they made like $300 or $400, and they were super excited about it. And Tim was thinking, we should do this every week, And he actually came to me about doing that same thing, that calendar, with me and my comic strip, Jim's Journal. And that didn't come to fruition for whatever reason. And then he partnered up with this guy, Chris Johnson, who I don't know that Chris had any sales experience or anything, but he was like just one of the most spectacular people that you could ever possibly meet. And so Tim was like, well, I got to be in business with this guy. He's just spectacular. And so those two guys came to me, and it was almost like Tim anyway, was sort of doubling down on the proposal to do the calendar. He was like, hey, we want you to run your comic strip in this new newspaper, this, humor publication that we're going to start. And I didn't want to move my comic strip from the Daily Cardinal, because the Daily Cardinal was I think still is, a very high circulation college newspaper. It's one of the better college newspapers. But I offered to draw 3 other cartoons for them. I was so excited about them and what they were doing that I wanted to do as much as I could. So I came up with 3 other comic strip ideas under different names, different drawing styles. So it would look like, there were a lot of newspapers in Madison at that time. And there was even one called Graphic Flack that was all graphics, all comics. And then there was also the Comic Times, I think it was called, which was full color, and everything. And there were really good comics in the Cardinal. There were a couple in the Badger Herald, and obviously the major dailies had comics too. So it was a really crowded field. And I thought, well, this new paper is going to have something to distinguish it. So let's make it look like they've somehow tapped into this huge reservoir of cartoon drawing talent, and they have this huge stable of amazing cartoonists that no one else somehow found. And so I started doing cartoons for them from issue 1. And it was so fun being involved with them. I was hanging out at the office. I was helping them come up with ideas and helped them, talk about what to call it, helped come up with that name. And about a year into it, they left and sold it to me and 2 other guys. And then eventually one of those other guys wanted out. So yeah, inside of a year, I was like owner, editor. But again, I had already been kind of doing the work of, running it and editing it and coming up with a lot of the content.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really that much of a change for me to own it.
Now, at this point, everybody knows The Onion from seeing it online over the years, or the Onion News Network. What did it look like in its initial stages? I mean, you kind of described it, but and then how was it? Just Madison to begin with?
Yep, it was about, I don't know, 10,000 circulation in Madison, and it was like a small tabloid-sized newspaper, 8, sometimes 16 pages. I think 16 was the most we did for the first couple of years. But it's pretty interesting. You look at it, and it's pretty close to what it is today. It was. So I originally wanted it to be a magazine, because if you're going to do a humor publication, you should make it a magazine, because all humor came in the form of magazines like The Lampoon and Mad and Cracked. Spy was like a really big humor magazine at the time. And Spy was a big influence on The Onion, no question. But we couldn't afford that. We couldn't afford the full color cover and everything. So newsprint was the only thing we could afford. And function followed form. It was a newspaper, so it had to be a parody of a newspaper. Right. So very early on, it was like silly parody news stories, making fun of local news, making fun of tabloid news, like news, grocery store news, tabloid type stuff. And slowly but surely, we started getting a little more sophisticated as we learned how to do it over the years. And the logo of the Onion, like, it looked different then, but it changed, sort of like if you look at, I don't know, the logo of any major company like Coca-Cola, for example, you look at their original logo, it looks kind of similar to the current logo. The current logo is just much more slick, obviously had a lot of designers really perfecting that. And psychologists came in and said, now this curve right here would be a little more effective if we just tweaked it by 2% or whatever. And that's exactly what happened. The history of the Onion logo is so interesting to me, because it's almost like an analogy for the history of the Onion itself. It was a little loose and a little more wacky and, kind of not really slapped together. It was pretty good initially, but over the years, it slowly evolved. And as we got more designers in working on ads, they would tweak it. And we had one designer, Randall Jones, who eventually designed the new logo, the current logo, made his own font and kind of used the old font as inspiration. And then the Onion symbol was a thing that Chris Johnson had drawn in pen, and we put it at the end of every article. So it was like the little button on every article was this little onion. And that onion went through the same process where it was like, it was refined, some of the lines were cleaned up, and then Randall Jones made a font out of it. And we decided on this particular green color. One of our designers was a color expert and knew the Pantone color thing. And we came up with what's our number? What's the green that we're always going to use? So it was really fun. I'm really getting into the minutia here about the logo.
I like it though. I mean, especially like, these days it's all memes, it's all online. So but it's all coming from the same place.
Big picture wise, it was similar. Like I definitely see a through line, but if you just compare the beginning to now, they're pretty radically different. Right. It was just a bunch of like college dropouts and losers and people who didn't have anything better to do, staying up all night, trying to come up with funny stuff, and really sometimes not knowing which issue would be our last, because either we were going to get sued by cousin subs or, for making fun of them, or we were just not going to have enough money to print. We never missed an issue. We never, couldn't afford to print an issue. So that was a point of pride for me.
Seriously.
And the writing style definitely was very all over the place back then. It was like, oh yeah, this guy, he's pretty funny. He can write something. Let's get him in there to write something. And then, over time, more like regular staff people would come back and improve. And then we all sort of developed this collective voice and all started writing in that same news parody voice. That's happened in like the mid 90s. So it was like a little less than 10 years after the beginning of it that we really kind of discovered our voice, and then went online around the same time. So a lot of people don't even know it used to be a newspaper before it was online. And obviously the newspaper continued until I think 2012 or so, maybe 2013 in a few different places. But yeah, over the years, we experimented with franchising the newspaper to different towns and kept doing that even after we went online. And we always tried to diversify. We started doing radio news really early. That became really popular. For a time, if you listen to the Arbitron ratings, we had more listeners on the radio than we ever had readers in print. And then we made a couple of like TV pilots. We started getting involved in TV in the mid to late 90s. And then, you know, we did a book. And a lot of those things helped us survive because, you know, there were times like when the internet crashed, the whole .com boom and bust in the year 2000, 2001, you know, we had a thriving print business. So we were able to survive that, no problem. And then a few years later, 2008, the print business collapsed and a lot of newspapers, magazines went under, but we had a thriving online business. So we survived that. And it was just by sheer luck. And the fact that we really diversified and tried to get our fingers in every pie that we were able to keep going.
Yeah, smart. I mean, even today, you know, just being in media, that's what we try to do too, just because you never know what's going to be. Something's always up, something's always down.
Exactly.
Where did the name The Onion come from? You said you helped develop that. What was the inspiration?
Yeah, so the first name, the working title was The Rag, and that was going for a good couple of months. And it just, for whatever reason, it wasn't sitting right with us. And then, so Chris Johnson used to eat raw onion on a piece of untoasted white bread for breakfast. And his uncle was visiting once, and, you know, it was Tim and Chris's flat where the onion, it was in their dorm. And they moved out of the dorms onto this flat on either Gorham or Johnson. I can't remember which one.
Yeah.
And his uncle came by and smelled this onion smell from Chris and the kitchen and everything. Is, you know, why don't you call it The Onion?
Yeah.
And it kind of stuck because it was a great name for a newspaper. It's like you peel back the layers to get at the facts, you know?
Yeah.
So it stuck.
Let's take it back. You're originally from Minnesota, right?
Yeah. Born and raised in Minneapolis till I was about 12. And now by some miracle of chance, I'm back here. So,
yeah. Do you like it? You like
yeah, it's very cute here. It's super cute in Minneapolis. Yeah. I never would have come here in a million years, but my ex-wife and son moved here, and I wanted to be in the same city as him because he was only 13 when they made the move. Maybe he was 12 actually. Right around the change, 12 to 13. So I didn't want to be in a different city. So I was like, all right, I guess I'm moving to Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's very cute.
But you grew up there, and then you decided to go to Madison for college, right?
Yeah. So at the age of 12, my mother got remarried to my evil stepdad, and they moved to a farm town in Wisconsin called Ellsworth.
Sure.
And that's where I went to high school there, and very formative years for me. And they split up, and then I lived with my mom and my brother in town, in the town of Ellsworth. We had a farm at first, and we moved to the town. And then from there, Madison was like, other than the Twin Cities, that was sort of the Mecca. And really my best friend in high school went to college there, and that's kind of why I ended up there. He and his best friend, they were like 4 years older than me, and they were kind of like my creative muses. We used to do radio drama recordings together and wrote a lot of scripts together. And so when I got out of high school, I didn't even stay for graduation. The day the last day of school in high school, I got on a bus and I headed to Madison, and lived with those guys in an apartment, like a 2-bedroom apartment, and started making movies and, you know, I was just a fool, like thinking I could just be a creative person and make a living doing that. I got a job at McDonald's, you know, so that's how I paid the bills. But it was all about the the creativity. I was going to try to figure out some way to make a living making movies or doing something creative.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's all fools, I think, in comedy. That's sort of what you need. You need that whatever that energy is in order to make it happen.
It's that total ignorant confidence of youth.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
that's what I use that. That was my fuel for the first 5 years.
So when you first got there, when did you first get published, and what did you study?
So I had a couple of big breaks, I guess you'd call them, in Madison. So I was very ambitious, and I noticed these commercials they used to air on one of the local affiliates for the Crime Busters, the local Crime Busters. And I went to the police station. I said, "Hey, you need some help directing those? Because they're kind of crappy." Yeah. And so they let me direct some of these Crime Busters ads. And I got to be in one and stuff. It was like reenactments of crimes,
Yeah.
And that was really fun. And then I made a bunch of radio skits with those guys, and we got involved with local radio and met Rick Murphy, who recently died. He used to host the show on WORT, but back in the mid 80s, he was kind of like the production guru of Madison. And, I guess we just took him on as kind of a mentor because we loved his aesthetic and wanted to get better at making radio dramas. And then I started doing local commercials at various, I guess mostly at Concept Productions, which is gone now. And so, I was starting to sort of create a career for myself, like a creative career, but still, needing the day job, still having to work at McDonald's. And then I left and I went to college, first in River Falls, Wisconsin for like a year. And then I went to the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut for a year. And then I went to the University of Southern California for a year. Now,
oh, wow.
I flunked out of high school. I never went back for my diploma, but I didn't officially graduate. But I was able to test into the University of Wisconsin at River Falls. They had a thing where if you passed a grammar test, you could get in. I guess they had low enrollment or something. Uh-huh. And so from there, I worked really hard, and I got good transfer grades to go to Connecticut. And from there, I got good transfer grades to go to USC because they, first of all, I was dirt poor. So I had a full ride scholarship just because I was poor. So I hardly had to pay for anything. I only got a $2,500 loan, like a Pell Grant, also some other stuff. And they didn't ever have to look at my high school transcripts because I had enough transfer credits. So my goal was to go to the USC Film School, and I took one class and I met some people and hung out with, some film people, and quickly realized, I think it was because I went to this one film festival there. It was a student film festival. And I thought all the films sucked. I thought they looked really amazing. They had great production values, and USC has this deal where you can use like professional actors in the films. They have like a SAG agreement. So there were like actors in these movies that I knew from TV shows and movies, but the stories were terrible. And I realized, you know what? To make great art, I need to actually live an interesting life. I can't just be steeped in learning about other art like you do at USC. And, I think it was the right decision. Like I could have paid a lot of money to, again, I don't know how long my scholarships would have lasted if I had stayed there for the 4 full years. I don't know how much I would have had to pay for that. But yeah, my life probably would have been a lot different. But yeah, I left and I went back to Madison. And that's when I started sending my cartoons around to the local newspapers. I had gotten more realistic. Okay, I wasn't going to be a big movie director now. I was going to do something cheap, and cartooning is really cheap, paper and pen. Yeah. So yeah, because at that time, I'd been a working stiff for 4 years, just trying to pay my bills, working minimum wage jobs. So I needed to get really serious about trying to figure out how to crack this nut of how to make a living doing comedy.
Well, and at that point, a lot of people, it's the dream, especially at that time, it's a dream to go to LA and, make it in the film industry. So coming back, did you feel like you were giving up on your dream, or did you have confidence that this was going to get you to where you needed to be?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I remember being 16 and I went to see a movie at the theater, and I think the name of the movie was Flashpoint. I forget who directed it, but Chris Christopherson was in it. And I saw it in a mall movie theater.
Yeah.
And I literally called my mom from the theater and I said, I'm not coming home. I'm going straight to Hollywood because these people don't know what the hell they're doing. These movies are terrible and I could do better.
Yeah.
So I was so passionate and I was so on fire to try to like do something creative. Now, I'm sure if I had gone then, I would have ended up a street prostitute, and that probably wouldn't have worked out for me. But
Right.
she's very supportive, and she was like, well, if you want to, but I could read between the lines, like, this is really stupid. So I kept making movies on my own and did it more slowly. But what I learned from that experience was that it's not where you are, it's who you are. So I never had this idea that if I'm in New York, or because when I was in school in Connecticut, I was like an hour and a half from New York. I could go anytime I wanted. And then when I lived in LA, you're right there. Hollywood is, a 20-minute scooter ride away or whatever. It was fun to see those places, but I knew that ultimately what would matter was me. And like, was I developing my skills? Was I building a craft? And was I creating work that was interesting? And ultimately that worked out for me, because once I got my cartoon going and I had a really big success with my cartoon strip, and that led to The Onion, Hollywood started coming for me. People from Hollywood would fly out to Madison, Wisconsin and court me, so I didn't have to go to LA to try to make it. Like that's always been my thing. And maybe it's because I'm an introvert, but I'm very competitive. I just don't like to be in the red ocean. I want to be in the blue ocean. I want to do my thing and I want to learn my craft. I want to get really good at it. And I'm confident that when I do, the industry is enough of a meritocracy that someone will notice and they'll say, hey, that's what happened with my comic strip. I got so lucky that after I had done my comic strip for a while and I put out my first book, it actually, even though I self-published it, it made the New York Times bestseller list.
Wow.
And so a big publisher called me and said, hey, we want to publish your book. They never would have discovered that had I not done it myself and done all that groundwork. If I had just mailed it to them, it would have been a flat rejection, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So I learned that lesson. Work hard, you'll get noticed if you care to. Like at some point with The Onion, there were offers to buy The Onion, and I was thinking, we're actually doing pretty well right now. Like maybe we should just keep owning it and keep doing it ourselves. Like why should we ever sign a deal with a big company and make less money and not be in charge of it anymore? And ultimately that's what we ended up doing. But there were a lot of years where we just kept going and kept it family owned, and that worked well for us.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was in Madison, that was the best day of the week, was the day that the Onion came out, the new.
Thanks for saying that. Yeah, those were fun days.
And then you would always see nobody was paying attention in class that day because everyone had a copy of the Onion out.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But
happy to contribute to the delinquency of you.
But the Onion, has had a lot of the parody in it, and the satire in it is goofy, and it's sort of a parody of local news. But then there's a lot of, political stories it took on as well, which I think had a very strong voice. What was the direction or the motive, I guess, behind it, generally speaking? Did you have something like that? Was it just to make people laugh, or did you have, sort of an undertone of social commentary that you also wanted front and center?
Yeah. So anytime you're doing satire, the writer has a ton of opinions, and they're just trying to get their opinion out. They're just using humor as the conduit because it's more digestible. Nobody wants to read a boring editorial, or nobody wants to hear a sermon. Everybody wants comedy. So the satirical writer just injects the comedy with their opinions. So yeah, I had a ton of opinions, very opinionated person about politics, and tended to attract other writers who were the same. And so, yeah, you generally find that writers are really into social justice and really into progressive politics, like the power of the people versus the 1%. And that's a winning strategy. You see that in pretty much all satire and comedy, where they're making fun of the elites and the rich and the powerful and, entrenched authority figures and establishment. And they're aggrandizing the common people, because then you're not doing a left-right thing. You're doing a 1% versus 99%, and you're going to win that. You're going to win that. You're going to get 99% of the people on your side. So that's what my politics are, and that's kind of what has been infused in The Onion over the years, certainly.
What has been the hardest time in The Onion's history?
Boy, there's been quite a few, but probably the hardest was after we had sold the voting shares to this very kindly old billionaire gentleman by the name of David Schaefer. He was kind of a hands-off owner, but he hired, a right hand to run it, named Steve Hanna. And Steve was sort of he became the CEO of The Onion. And he kind of let The Onion run the way it ran. I think he was more involved in the sales and business aspect. The creative was kind of its own siloed thing. Mm-hmm. And I used to take a lot of hiatuses. I would go from The Onion and I would go make a movie, or I would do something else. I'd be gone for 2 or 3 years at a time. And one time that was happening was around 2011, 2012. And Steve had decided that, so the editorial office had moved to New York City, but the business office was in Chicago. And Steve wanted to move the two offices together in Chicago. So it had always been a dream of the writers to go to New York City and be there, and they loved it there. And it's really hard to take a writer out of the New York City culture and take him back to the Midwest. And they didn't want to do it. And so it was a real schism that was happening. And Steve was saying, hey, I'll fire them all if I have to, and I'll just hire new people in Chicago. There's plenty of funny people in Chicago. There's the Second City, et cetera. And so I reached out to both the writers and Steve to see if there was anything I could do to help, because I knew that if he fired all the writers and just hired new people from Chicago, that he'd lose the culture and The Onion wouldn't be the same anymore. And I wanted to preserve that culture as much as possible. So the writers didn't take me up on my offer of help. They said, we got this. Steve took me up on my offer, and he offered to hire me to come to sort of manage the transition and try to get as many people from New York to come to Chicago as possible, knowing that if I didn't do that, he was going to fire them and just hire new people from Chicago that nobody knew. And so I felt like I really didn't have a choice but to do that. And it was very painful. And a lot of the writers hated me for it, still hate me to this day. And we only convinced like a half dozen or so to come to Chicago. There were like another dozen or two who permanently basically divorced themselves from The Onion and, will never speak to me again. So that was super painful, because a lot of them, I gave them their first jobs in comedy, and I trained them and I loved them. And I was so proud of all the work they were doing. It was just really awful to see all that happen.
I mean, do you have regrets about how you did that, or is it?
I only have one regret about how I did that. So I don't regret doing it because I feel like I didn't really have any choice. Because I knew what Steve was going to do had I not agreed to do that. The only regret I have is that I basically came back. So this is after I had sold my interest in The Onion. And I came back as an employee, and I came back like, okay, I'm going to be an employee. Tell me what you want me to do. That was a mistake. I should have owned the situation more and thrown my weight around more and done what I thought was the right thing to do instead of just blindly following what Steve and his business people wanted me to do, because I thought they made a lot of really dumb decisions that weren't in the best long-term interest of The Onion. A lot of them were in the best short-term interest of, profiting this quarter or whatever. Right. But so that put me in a really weak position, just being an employee and wanting to please them, as opposed to if I had just come in like a tornado and said, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. Because that's how I always used to run The Onion, because I owned it and I felt like I had the right to do that. But I've learned now that even when you don't have the right to do that, you can still act like that. And oftentimes people respect it anyway,
Right.
because people respect power and charisma. And, I don't have a lot of that because I'm just a kind of a meek Midwestern introvert.
Yeah.
But when I really care about something and I want it to do well, I can be pretty insufferable, and I can be a real steamroller. So that's the only regret I have about that.
Yeah. And how do you feel The Onion is today compared to where it was when you left that role?
Creatively, I think they're doing great. Chad Nackers is the editor-in-chief, and he was a guy I hired in the late 90s to be a graphics guy. And then when I came back after a hiatus in 2005, Chad was still there, but he was still doing graphics. And I thought, oh my God, Chad is so funny. Why isn't he writing? Let's get that guy writing.
Yeah.
And so then he started writing, and now he's the editor-in-chief, and he's doing great. The staff is great. And they're, again, still pretty siloed and separate from the business interests. I think the business interests, I don't even know who owns The Onion anymore. It's some investment group or something. They continue to make tone-deaf decisions about The Onion and its future. So that always baffles me. Like when they sold it to Univision, I was like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
That's weird. And, the way they had to change things when they got grouped into this Gizmodo group of companies, like they got rid of so many of the pictures on the news articles. You need the pictures. The pictures are what make it funny. I mean, they sort of like complete the humor experience. So they're doing a lot of things like that are business decisions. Mm-hmm. And when I was running The Onion, my business partner and I had a very clear agreement. I couldn't tell him how to spend the money, and he couldn't tell me what to print. Mm-hmm. So it was a very unusual agreement in publishing. Normally, the business people have all the control in the world about what's published. And if they don't like it, they'll fire the people and get people in there who will publish what they want. Right. And that's not how The Onion was. So unfortunately, that's changed. And now the business interests do have more power. But because of the culture at The Onion, I think they have less power at The Onion than they would at a normal publication. But unfortunately, they do have more now than they used to. So that's unfortunate.
Excuse the interruption, ladies and gentlemen, but I just want to thank the sponsors of this podcast. First and foremost, Jolly Good Soda, the title sponsor. They've been so good to us. And it's a great soda. I've enjoyed it since I was a kid. You can get it if you go to any grocery store in Wisconsin. You just get on up there and you ask them for that Jolly Good soda. They'll point you right toward it. If they don't have Jolly Good, just say, hey, are you going to get that Jolly Good in or no? And they probably won't say or no to your face. But if you still can't find the grocery store, just go to jollygoodsoda.com. You can order it right offline. You can order their merch, and that goes for anybody anywhere in the U.S. If you don't have it in your own local grocery store. Also, I want to thank Duluth Trading Company for being a proud sponsor of the Cripescast, or at least a sponsor of the Cripescast. And their clothes, I will tell you, are something I'm proud of wearing every day because it's great stuff. It's designed and the whole deal right here in the Midwest. Right in Wisconsin, actually, Mount Horeb, Wisconsin. Great folks working over there. We've done a ton of fun videos with them. They've been an absolutely amazing partner, and their clothes are fantastic. They've got everything, but what I like about Duluth is that they really just focus on the most practical clothes you can get. So if you have a job that needs to get done, Duluth Trading Company, they got the clothes that'll help you get that job done. Okay, and I will tell you, it's fashionable stuff too. Okay, bottom line, Duluth Trading Company, comfortable clothes, fantastic clothes. Check them out, duluthtrading.com. Finally, we've got Valentine's Day coming up. Is it really coming up, or are you just saying that for the purposes of this ad? Probably the latter. And what better way to say I love you to your special someone than something that says, watch out for deer. And luckily for you, if you go to cripescast.com, click on the merch section, we got shirts that says watch out for deer, koozies that say watch out for deer, we got lures that say watch out for, we got the whole deal. Okay, and if watch out for deer is not the way you want to say I love you to your special someone, well, don't worry, we got keep her moving shirts, we got ope shirts, we got tell your folks I says hi, and everything in between. Cribbage boards too, fishing lures, koozies, did I say? Yes, you did, Charlie. You're forgetting what you're saying. You should get back to the podcast. Okay, thanks so much for listening to the ad section. We'll see you real quick once. Bye-bye. Do you have any favorite headlines or stories that stand out as like, yes, this is The Onion at its best?
There's so many. I'll go through a couple. So one was an editorial by the CEO of the Gillette Razor Company. Uh-huh. And can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, sure.
God bless you, Charlie. It was, fuck it, we're doing 5 blades. And so it was an editorial by this CEO who was so funny, and he was so cocky, and it was so outlandish and hyperbolic, the idea that you could have a 5-bladed razor. And then a few months later, Gillette unveiled a 5-bladed razor. So it was one of those articles that predicts the future, which is always so fun when that happens.
Yeah.
And then another one was Megan, and I believe Joe Garden wrote that article. It's a beautiful article. I highly recommend looking it up. And then there was another editorial written by Megan Gans. And it's not the funniest headline, but it was one of our best articles. And it was something like, "Please stop turning my books into movies" by Dr. Seuss. And so it was written in the style of Dr. Seuss, and it was really amazing. She really nailed it. And it was so accurate because I know that he didn't want movies made from his books. And they kept churning out these terrible movies like the Jim Carrey Grinch and the Mike Myers Cat in the Hat. And it's a beautiful, beautiful article. And it really contains all of the rage that I feel like he would feel if he knew this was happening.
Yeah.
And then there were a couple of news articles. One was written by Todd Hanson. It was printed the week that George W. Bush won his court case at the Supreme Court and became president. And it was Bush, quote, "Our long national nightmare of peace and prosperity is finally over," close quote. So the great thing about that article was it basically laid out everything that George Bush was going to do during his term as president, and all of it came true. Like, it was almost like writing the history of his presidency in advance. And an editorial writer, I forget which one, at the New York Times wrote a whole article about it, like 8 or 10 years later, saying, how did the Onion know that this was going to happen? They laid it out in advance. And so incredibly proud of that. There was another one that was just super funny to me. And it was a beautiful moment because I was on hiatus. So I was not going into the office. And they produced this headline, this front page story that I just thought was completely brilliant. And I was so proud of them. And it was one of those moments where it's like, your baby, you raise this baby and it goes off to college and it gets a great job and then it becomes president of the United States. You can't even express the pride. So the article was Al Gore places infant son in spaceship to escape dying planet. So the analogy was with the Superman story, but it was Al Gore, and they showed him in this futuristic spacesuit putting a baby in a spaceship with the planet, dying around him, just like on Krypton. And it was such a perfect analogy that I had not heard anyone make. And that was Joe Randazzo was the editor. And I think Todd Hanson wrote that story as well. Todd Hanson is by far the crowning achievement of The Onion in terms of its writing talent. He was plucked out of obscurity washing dishes in Madison, Wisconsin. And now he's like one of the most celebrated writers of satire in America. And wow. He's done so much great work at The Onion. The article was so expertly written and it was so funny. And was just so proud of them at that moment because I had nothing to do with it. It was just like, it felt like such a gift,
Yeah. Yeah. What goes into writing a really good Onion headline? Is it set up punchline? Is it like a tweet in essence? Like how would
it's a tweet. So Norm Macdonald has this thing where he says the holy grail of any one-liner joke is where the punchline and the setup are the same. And that's what every Onion headline is. It's just a joke where the setup and the punchline are in the same place. So what makes a perfect one? You kind of know it when you see it, but it's something that communicates a really interesting subtext and does. So I wrote a whole book explaining this, kind of breaking it down and how to do it. It's called How to Write Funny. Yeah. But I'll try to condense it for you here. But it basically communicates a really interesting subtext and does it by activating as many of the 11 known funny filters. These are like triggers in your brain that make you laugh as possible. So some of the best headlines use 8, 9, 10, sometimes all 11 of the funny filters. And these are just literary devices that make people laugh. They're like hyperbole, irony, character, analogy, things like that, madcap. And if you can do all that and communicate a really interesting subtextual opinion, like some opinion about what's wrong with the world, or that's usually what it is, some human foible that's kind of universal or whatever, then you've got a real winner. And that's generally what it takes.
I think I understood all those. Madcap. I don't think I know exactly what that is.
That's just pure silliness and like physical humor, funny faces, goofy words, pratfalls, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Got it. What does it stand for, Madcap?
It probably is an abbreviation of something. I'd have to look that up. I don't know what the etymology is of that word.
Well, you have since recently you've started doing more of this sort of teaching comedy. Obviously, you mentioned the book, and am I correct? You do classes as well?
Yeah, so I started doing that at the Second City when I was in Chicago with the Onion, and then left that. I'm doing it on my own now at howtowritefunny.com, and it was one of my favorite things about working at the Onion was bringing in new people. We never hired experienced writers. We always brought in people who had zero experience because we wanted to mold them in the Onion image, and we didn't want them to have any bad habits. So one of the most gratifying things for me in my entire career at the Onion has been like shepherding these people and helping them realize their talent and build their skills as a comedy writer, and then go off and do amazing things. And so many of them are so successful now in TV and movies and everything else. So being able to continue that after the Onion is great. And also it's like, I don't have to do any of the hard part. I mean, I still do occasionally write comedy, and I write novels, and I, have all sorts of aspirations, but I'm not on that horrible treadmill of having to produce a certain quantity of comedy every week, like I used to be at the Onion or with my comic strip, which is really hard. It's punishing. So yeah, it's really rewarding, and I love it.
Did it take a lot for you to get out of that need to produce every week? Or, I mean, because it's a pain in the ass, but there's also an adrenaline to it, and there's an addiction to it.
Yes.
I've found. Did you miss that? Do you still miss it?
No, I don't really miss it because I can have it anytime I want. I make my own schedule now. So if I want to work on a project obsessively, I totally can.
Yeah.
And I sometimes do, because I do love that energy that you get from doing that. What's painful is when you're pushed past your limit, and it's like you feel like you've run out of raw material to create comedy, and you're just running on fumes, and it's really painful. So I used to love the hiatuses we used to have at the Onion, where I'd go and like climb a mountain somewhere and just not look at another human face for like 2 weeks. And then you could come back and you could write comedy, for another 3 months, 4 months. So the other thing I like about being on that treadmill is that it's skill building. Like, you don't realize while you're in it how much you're gaining from that. It's such an investment in your future self in terms of your skill. You get so good at this stuff when you do it obsessively for so long,
Right. Yeah. I used to work at a news thing, which was basically all about doing jokes on the news. So you have, your setup punchlines, and to force yourself to do that on a daily basis. And some stuff isn't great, but you do it and you finish it and you get it done. And I feel like the Onion's got a lot of that same similar thing.
What was the news comedy outfit you were involved in?
Yeah, it was called 1 Minute News. It was like a YouTube news channel in the early days, sort of framed after the Jon Stewart thing, that style.
Yeah.
But it failed, as many do, but it got me in the habit of that 10,000 hours of just writing consistently.
Yeah.
And I've kind of kept that. But how important is it to take a break from it, especially in this age when you have got a lot of creators out there who, they depend on the algorithm favoring them, which depends on continuous production. How important is it to take a break from that when, all the elements are saying don't ever take a break?
Yeah, it's critical. That's why you have to step back. You have to delegate. Like, if I hadn't hired a team of writers to do a lot of that work, I'd be a shell of a man right now. So
Yeah.
you have to delegate, you have to train other people how to do it, and then you can step back.
Yeah.
It's the only way to do it. Yeah, it's absolutely critical. Like I love being obsessed, and I love having a project that I'm obsessed with, and I love, working on it until I fall asleep and then getting up and going right back to it. That's just one of the sweeter feelings of life for me, but I can't do it every day,
Yeah.
And I like now, like I didn't used to have this, but I'm so lucky now to have a situation where, like I said, I do it when I choose to, and I don't have to do it when I don't want to do it. So that helps me.
Looking at the comedy landscape today as it pertains to satire and news, what do you see is going on? And do you think we're in a better place or a worse place than we were, say, 10 years ago?
Politically, we're in a worse place. Satirically, I think there's so much. There's like a glut of news-based satire. I actually really enjoy seeing new comedy come around that's not news parody based, because it seems like that's a format that's been done to death with The Onion and Daily Show, Colbert. And, I guess a lot of those people like Colbert, they're doing their own late night show, and they're doing comedy and political comedy. And that counts, that's satire like anything else. But yeah, sometimes like I kind of know my opinion of it, and I feel like a lot of that is performing for the choir, Like I'm really intrigued by comedy that kind of breaks through that and has a new, fresh voice and is doing something different. So yeah, I would say the state of it now is it's a little tired. And like, that's why The Onion started Clickhole, because it was like a way to do some other kind of comedy that wasn't fake news.
Right.
Like the writers get frustrated and they get bored. However, the fake news format is great because you can basically write about anything you want. And you have different formats. You have the editorial format, you have the news format, and you even have these other formats of these little like opinion on the street feature that The Onion does. So yeah, comedy is a funny thing, because when something is successful, like The Onion and the Daily Show and all the things that came after it, people think, oh, that's what comedy is, so we should do that. But that's the opposite of how comedy works. The way comedy works is the audience likes a new thing. So whatever the crazy new different thing is, that's what they're going to like. So I feel like the emergence of memes and funny TikTok videos is like the latest trend in comedy, because it's an amazingly crowdsourced type of comedy where everybody in the world is trying to do something funny every second. And so at every time you open your phone, you're going to find something amazingly funny that's done by a total unknown person who doesn't have a history with comedy. And there's a very good chance that it's super original. That's usually the stuff that breaks out. And that's how a lot of comedy stars are being discovered now, is that very method. So it's a really cool Wild West kind of landscape right now.
Yeah, I would agree. And I also agree kind of on, when you had Jon Stewart, you had The Onion, and then after Jon Stewart, that was the thing. And then so many of the people who were on The Daily Show have their own shows. And I think almost cable news has taken on that Jon Stewart-y kind of like over the shoulder type thing. So yeah, I feel like it's become a little bit more white noise. And as you said, sort of preaching to the choir. Do you think there's a way for satire news to kind of reach another level, or like, do you think there's something missing, or do you think we just kind of need a break from it?
No, I mean, I think it's part of the media landscape right now. It's probably always going to be. People like it. It really filled a niche because traditional journalism wasn't doing its job. Traditional journalism was trying to be neutral and trying to both sides everything. And we all know they're just corporate hacks that are giving us nothing but propaganda. So the only way we can get anything even remotely truthful is through comedy, So I think we need it, and it's always going to be around. And I was going to say the danger of it is like, once that becomes co-opted by corporate interests, good luck to us all,
Yeah, right.
I mean, there's a good amount of that, certainly. Yeah, it's always going to be around, and that's fine. Like, it doesn't have to reinvent itself or be amazing ever again. It can just be what it is. And then there's some new comedy that's going to come around that's going to be amazing that we're all going to like,
Yeah. For up and coming comedians, what are the intro tips? Like, if I want to just start today, what would you say I should do?
It's really not that much different than when I started. And what I did is I did everything. I wanted to do everything and anything I could related to comedy. The only difference now is it's about 1,000% easier to get exposed, to find an audience, because you can put your stuff up on a blog. If you're writing, you can put yourself up on YouTube. If you're performing, you can tweet, you can be on social media, and you can find an audience and build an audience. Like, when I was starting, there was a big mountain with an ivory tower at the top that you had to climb and get into before your stuff could ever be seen. So, go start a website, go start performing and getting it on YouTube. There's nothing stopping you. So yeah, if I were 18 again, I would be like a kid in a candy store with all this media that we have access to. I'd have a podcast where I talked for 2 hours every day.
Yeah. Right.
Just like ranting about, joke ideas. I'd be unstoppable. I'd be insufferable.
Yeah. No, and you're right, because various platforms, YouTube, TikTok, their algorithms do support new comedians because so many people have been plucked from absolute obscurity and now have a huge following for what they're doing, which is cool to see.
I love it.
What is next for you? You can do whatever you want. What would be your dream at this point?
Yeah, I'm living the dream. I'm really doing what I want right now. I love teaching. I love passing on what I know to people who are interested in learning it. And then creatively, I'm really focusing on writing books right now. So I'm writing novels, and I'm writing some under my own name and some under a pen name that aren't comedic, because I've always wanted to write science fiction, but you can't really do straight science fiction if your experience is in comedy. Like, no one would accept it. They'd be like, well, this isn't funny. And so I have a pen name that I don't tell anyone about, where I do that stuff. And I had an audacious goal last year that I was going to write a novel a month, and didn't do so well. I think I only put out 3 books last year, but
wow.
I continue to be on that treadmill and wanting to produce as many books as possible. So I did my first novel under my own name, came out last year. It was called The Joke at the End of the World, and it did surprisingly well. So I'm doing more novels in that series with that character. Mm-hmm. It was such a fun experience because the novel was written in the voice of a 12-year-old boy. And I found this amazing 12-year-old actor to do the audiobook, and kind of the end of 20 and the beginning of 21 was me recording him and editing him and putting that out. And it's one project that I'm probably more proud of than anything else I've ever done. He just did such an amazing job, and it was such a cool project, but it really took over my life for a few months.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my thing. Yeah. Writing the books and doing the audiobooks, and being whimsical too. Like, if a project comes along that seems interesting, I might do it. I might not, but I always do like to have a plan, but one that's flexible in case something comes along. And the plan right now is to write as many books as possible before the world explodes.
Yeah. Well, you better get on that, because
I know
we're getting close. China, Russia, climate change, we're getting there. So,
so I want the cockroaches that inherit the earth after they evolve intelligence and dig us up. I want them to think, hey, that Scott Dikkers wrote some pretty cool stuff. That's my goal.
That's great. Well, I think you're gonna achieve that, and
I hope so.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, is there anything I didn't ask in here that you never get asked that you really wish I would have asked?
No, it was a delightful conversation. I feel like we covered a lot of fun stuff.
Yeah, I think so. Well, again, such an honor to have you on. So thank you for taking the time. Yeah, I appreciate you.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, we'll talk soon. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Take care, Charlie.
All right. Cool. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that is it for this week's episode of the Cripescast. Thank you all for listening. Come see me on tour. You can find out those dates. You go to cripescast.com. And if you are interested in taking a comedy writing class with Scott, check out his comedy writing classes, howtowritefunny.com/courses, or you can check out his books, scottdikkers.com. And make sure you follow Cripescast on all social media platforms. It's at Cripescast, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Okie dokes, that is it for this week. Until next week, everyone, keep her moving and watch out for deer. Real good now. Bye-bye.
So roll out the barrel and get the band brewing. Life's got you down, just keep her moving. It's on Wisconsin, the Badgers say it's the old Wisconsin Jubilee.
You know, sometimes when you're ice fishing, you put your foot in the walleye hole and go ass over tea kettle and you think you're done. No, you gotta keep her moving.